The year 1917 was defined by frantic demand. America was mobilizing for the war that raged in Europe, and the U.S. Radium Corporation plant in Orange, New Jersey was operating 24 hours a day. The most valuable product wasn't guns or steel, but time, specifically time that could be read in the dark. The girls of the dial painting studio were the heart of this effort. They were mostly teenagers and young women from immigrant families, Irish, Italian, Polish, drawn by the promise of high wages. At a time when women were lucky to earn $5 a week, these painters were pulling in nearly 3 times that amount. Kate Schaub sat elbow to elbow with May Cubberly. The studio was large and noisy, filled with the scratching of brushes, the hum of the ventilation system, and the steady, low chatter of 70 young women. But the noise faded when Kate focused on her crucible. She dipped her brush into the paste containing the powdered element, luminite, the company's trademark name for the zinc sulfide mixed with trace amounts of pure radium. The foreman, Mr. Reeder, walked the aisles, his hands perpetually shoved into his pockets. He often repeated the instruction, "Waste not, want not. Every grain is gold." Radium was the most expensive substance on Earth. Reeder watched their technique closely, frowning if a brush point wasn't fine enough to paint the tiny numerals. "Kate, look at your 3, he'd bark. "It's blobby. Get a point on that brush. Use your tongue, girl, like we showed you." It was the golden rule: lip, dip, paint. The delicate camel hair brushes frayed easily. The quickest, most efficient way to achieve the perfect point was to smooth the bristles between the lips. The metallic, Swedish dust of luminite coated their tongues instantly. "It's not just safe, girls," Mr. Reeder had declared on Kate's first day. "It's good for you. It's what they sell in drugstores for tonic water. Good for the blood, good for the complexion." And they believed him. The dust did give them a flush. They felt strong, energized, and proud to be working with a substance that medical science considered a miracle cure. The real joy of the job came at night. The residual powder clung to everything: their aprons, their shoes, their hair, and most wonderfully, their skin. May Cubberly perfected the art of the luminous kiss. She would deliberately coat her lips with a light dusting before leaving work. "I tried it on poor Tim last night," she confided to Kate, giggling. "He said when I kissed him good night, his cheek glowed blue for an hour." The girls used the radium dressed playfully. They called it liquid sunshine. They dusted the necks of their dresses and the shoulders of their coats before going out dancing. When the electric lights dimmed, they would appear to shimmer, ethereal and otherworldly. They painted intricate, glowing patterns on their fingernails and toenails. The ultimate show was painting their front teeth during lunch breaks, laughing as they flashed luminous smiles at each other in the darkened changing room. It was their secret, their beautiful compensation for the tedious work. Grace Fryer, sitting at the end of the line, rarely participated in the games. She was 22, pragmatic, and engaged to be married. She worked quickly and efficiently, but she was meticulous about wiping her station down before she left, using a rag provided by the company. "You should wash your mouth out properly, May," Grace warned one afternoon. "That stuff must taste awful." "It tastes like money, Grace," May shot back, wiping her hands on her apron, a futile gesture that merely redistributed the glow. "And besides, Dr. von Sachaki himself said it's harmless. Why would they put us at risk when we're doing war work?" The logic was sound. They were patriots. The company was respectable. And the glow was proof of their special status. How could something so beautiful, so magical, possibly be killing them? The first disturbing signs were subtle, easily dismissed, and always explained away by the company doctors. Amelia Maggia had been one of the fastest painters. She was known for the perfect, clean point she achieved on her brush. In the summer of 1920, she started complaining of a persistent, debilitating pain in her left arm. "It feels like the bone itself is aching," she told her sister Molly, who also worked at the plant. The plant doctor, hired and paid by U.S. Radium, diagnosed her condition as rheumatism, a common ailment for young factory workers. He prescribed aspirin and rest. But the pain didn't stop. Then came the dental issues. One evening, Molly watched horrified as Amelia's front molar simply loosened and fell out while she was eating. It wasn't decayed, the gums were not inflamed, the bone holding it had just dissolved. Over the next few months, Amelia's mouth became a nightmare. She developed abscesses that refused to heal. When her dentist tried to pull a severely aching tooth, he found the bone underneath was spongy, brittle, and oddly gray. The company doctor remained dismissive. He suggested Amelia was suffering from poor hygiene, or perhaps, privately, whispered dark things about latent venereal disease. Anything to avoid looking at the one common denominator, the paint. One night, Molly Maggia stayed late with Amelia, rubbing her feverish forehead. Molly noticed a terrible, chilling detail. In the pitch black of the room, Amelia's jawbone, beneath the thin, stretched skin of her cheek, seemed to emit the faintest, most terrifying greenish-yellow light. It wasn't magic anymore. It was a malignancy. But before Molly could process the horror, Amelia died, aged 24. Her death certificate cited syphilis of the jaw as the cause. The secret was safe, for a little while longer. The glow remained, a silent, terrible killer awaiting its next victim. The calendar pages turned, and the symptoms, once subtle, became aggressively undeniable. By 1923, the Orange, New Jersey studio was a house of whispers and absences. Kate Schaub felt a perpetual low-grade ache in her legs, a fatigue that aspirin couldn't touch. May Cubberly, the girl who perfected the luminous kiss, was skeletal, her face drawn. The illness manifested in a horror that seemed ripped from a medieval plague. The first sign was often excruciating, localized pain, usually in the jaw, the feet, or the spine. For May, the nightmare began with her teeth. Unlike simple decay, the teeth didn't rot from the outside. They simply lost their moorings. She'd wake up to find a molar sitting on her pillow, the gums receding to reveal bone that was eerily white, then gray, then necrotic. When a dentist attempted to pull an aching tooth, the procedure was a disaster. The jawbone, instead of holding firm, crumbled under the pressure. The infection in these open wounds was relentless. The flesh turned black, the pus smelt sickly sweet, and the bone underneath was riddled with tiny, worm-eaten holes. It was a condition given a horrifying nickname by the local doctors, who had never seen anything like it: radium jaw. The bone was essentially being killed and replaced by scar tissue, as the radium, chemically mimicking calcium, had settled permanently in their skeletons. The girls were dying from within, their own skeletons serving as slow internal executioners. The company, U.S. Radium Corporation, did not simply fail to act, they actively began to lie. As the death rate climbed, Amelia Maggia, Hazel Cusser, and others, and the local community started asking questions, the company's response hardened into a strategy of calculated denial and outright slander. Scientific manipulation. U.S. Radium hired independent scientists, paying them exorbitant fees to test the plant environment. Crucially, they instructed these scientists not to test the breath or the bones of the girls, but only the air quality. The resulting reports, which declared the environment safe, were circulated widely. Medical misdirection. The company doctor continued to attribute the symptoms to everything except radium. He invented new diagnoses: anemia, poor hygiene, nervous exhaustion, and most viciously, syphilis. This last diagnosis was a targeted character assassination. It cast the girls as morally deficient, suggesting their illness was a punishment for promiscuity, thus protecting the pristine reputation of the corporate product. The cover-up of the cure. The company knew the truth. They had provided the plant managers and male scientists with lead-lined aprons and special tongs to handle the material. They also initiated a study that conclusively linked the painters' deaths to the radium paint. But this study, the company's most damning evidence, was immediately sealed and buried deep in the corporate archives.
When Grace Fryer, her face pale and her gait unsteady, confronted Foreman Reader with newspaper clippings about Amelia's mysterious death, he just smiled thinly. "Miss Fryer, this radium is harmless. If you're feeling unwell, perhaps the work is too strenuous for your work ethic." By 1925, Grace Fryer and May Cubberley were desperately ill, but they had fire left in them. They understood they had been poisoned, and they refused to accept the syphilis slander that stained their names and the honor of the dead. Finding justice, however, was impossible. They were poor, and the corporation was rich. Every major law firm in Newark and New York refused to take the case. They were afraid of the powerful U.S. Radium Corporation and the complexity of proving an invisible, time-delayed poisoning. Despair was setting in. May could no longer walk without a cane. Kate was experiencing agonizing lightning pains in her legs. Then they found Raymond Barry. Barry was a young, ambitious lawyer from the Newark area. He wasn't part of the corporate establishment. He was hungry and possessed a fierce sense of indignation. When Grace laid out her story, the glowing paint, the constant licking of the brush, the horrible disintegrating bone, Barry was aghast. He quickly realized the scale of the fight. This wasn't just a workers' compensation case, it was a pioneering legal battle that would require proving a link between an invisible radioactive element and human death. He also realized the most critical, horrifying fact. The 5 surviving girls who agreed to join the lawsuit were likely all going to die before the trial could ever conclude. The race against the clock had begun. Raymond Barry knew he was taking on not just a corporation, but time itself. He was fighting for justice for the living and a legacy for the dead. He gathered the 5 women, Grace, Kate, May, Edna, and Quinta, and prepared for a legal war that would shock the nation. By the spring of 1927, the lawsuit, Grace Fryer et al. Versus the United States Radium Corporation, had officially begun, but it was already tainted by tragedy. The girls were wasting away. May Cubberley was virtually immobilized, her spinal column slowly disintegrating. Kate Schaub's teeth were gone, and she lived in constant searing pain. The case instantly became a legal and media spectacle. Raymond Barry, the young lawyer, realized their only chance was to turn the courtroom into a moral pulpit. They couldn't rely on slow-moving scientific discovery. They had to rely on public sympathy and the undeniable physical horror of the victims. The U.S. Radium Corporation, represented by formidable corporate attorneys, employed every delay tactic imaginable. Their strategy was simple, cold, and effective. Outlive the plaintiffs. They filed endless motions. They claimed the statute of limitations had run out. The poisoning had begun years earlier, even if the symptoms were new. They used the girls' deteriorating health as an argument against their credibility, suggesting the pain made them unreliable witnesses. Meanwhile, the girls were desperate. To afford the necessary expert medical testimony needed to counter the company's paid doctors, they had to sell off their remaining possessions. "We can't wait a year for the discovery phase, Mr. Barry," Grace Fryer stated one day, her voice thin but firm, speaking from a motorized wheelchair. "We won't be here." Barry agreed. He moved for an immediate and expedited trial, citing the plaintiffs' impending deaths. The judge, swayed by the moral urgency, reluctantly agreed to speed up the process. The courtroom in Newark was packed. The press, recognizing the dramatic stakes, had flooded the area. The papers quickly dubbed the case the trial of the 5 dying women. The testimony was shocking. The corporate defense team focused on character assassination, attempting to force the girls to admit that they had suffered from venereal disease, which the defense claimed was the real cause of their bone decay. Then came the centerpiece of the prosecution, the testimony of the girls themselves. Kate Schaub was wheeled in on a stretcher. She could barely lift her head. With quiet dignity, she recounted the lip, dip, paint routine, the beautiful glow, the assurances of the company men, and finally the slow, agonizing disappearance of her jawbone. They told us it was medicinal, like a tonic. They knew what they were doing to us. They watched us glow and said nothing. The emotional climax arrived when Dr. Harrison Maitland, a pioneering pathologist, took the stand. Maitland presented the most damning scientific proof. He had autopsied one of the deceased girls and found high concentrations of radium throughout her bones. More astonishingly, he introduced the concept of the body burden, revealing that the girls' skeletons were still actively emitting radiation years after they had stopped working. Maitland declared to the court, "These girls are carrying living internal threats in their bones. They are not merely sick, they are radioactive."
This testimony created a sensation. It proved the company had poisoned the girls' entire skeletal systems. The image of the beautiful, glowing paint turning into a permanent internal executioner seized the public imagination. The public pressure became unbearable for U.S. Radium. Newspapers across the country ran scathing editorials. The company's stock began to suffer, and they realized a protracted, ugly trial would destroy their reputation forever. Before the trial could conclude, the defense approached Raymond Barry with an offer to settle. The terms were unprecedented for the time. Each of the 5 girls would receive a lump sum of $10,000, a small fortune in the 1920s. Each girl would receive a $600 annual annuity for the rest of their lives. The company would agree to pay all medical and legal expenses for the remainder of the girls' illnesses. Raymond Barry presented the offer to the girls. They knew the money could never buy back their health, but it was an admission of guilt, a public retraction of the slander, and the guarantee that their families would not be financially ruined by their prolonged suffering. They accepted the settlement in June 1928. It was a victory won at the cost of their lives. The Radium Girls died relatively young, but their impact on American life was colossal and permanent. The immediate effect was that the settlement forced U.S. Radium and other dial painting companies to immediately adopt safety measures, respirators, lead shielding, and, critically, banning the lip-dip paint technique. The lasting legal and scientific legacy was profound. The Radium Girls established 2 revolutionary precedents: occupational disease. They successfully argued that an employer could be held responsible for an occupational disease that developed over time, not just for an immediate accident. This fundamentally changed workers' compensation laws across the United States. The right to know. The case highlighted the need for employers to disclose known hazards to their employees. The Radium Girls' suffering directly led to the founding of the field of health physics, the branch of science devoted to protecting humans from the harmful effects of radiation. Their bodies, studied by Martland and others, provided the necessary data to establish safe exposure limits for handling radioactive materials, limits that are still used in medicine and industry today. The ultimate victory of Grace, Kate, and the others was the creation of a blueprint for industrial safety legislation that culminated decades later in the creation of the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA. Their fight became a powerful, permanent symbol of the individual's right to safety over corporate profit. Kate Schaub and Grace Fryer outlived many of their comrades, living long enough to see their fight etched into the American legal framework. They were not heroes of war, but heroes of industry, their luminous deaths paving the way for millions of workers who followed. The glow of the radium on their clothes faded, but the light they shone on corporate accountability remains a beacon in American history. The story of the Radium Girls, of Grace Fryer, Kate Schaub, May Cubberly, and their dozens of colleagues is not merely a grim chapter in industrial history, It is a profound testament to the power of truth and the ultimate triumph of human dignity over corporate greed. They began as ordinary young women, their hands tipped in what they believed was a magical, patriotic glow. They became unwilling martyrs to a new scientific age, poisoned by the very element that promised them wealth and a vibrant future. Their tragedy forced America to confront an uncomfortable truth, that profit could not be prioritized over human life, and that the workplace was not inherently safe. The ultimate legacy of the Radium Girls is found not in their suffering, but in the enduring legal and safety standards their case created. Legal precedent. They established the right of workers to sue their employers for occupational diseases that manifest years after exposure, fundamentally reshaping workers' compensation and tort law. Scientific advancement. Their agonizing deaths provided the first crucial data for the field of health physics, leading directly to the establishment of global radiation safety protocols that protect every technician, doctor, and nuclear plant worker today. Safety standards. Their fight was a direct catalyst for the eventual formation of the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, ensuring that future workers would not have to point a dangerous brush with their lips. Though the girls themselves were tragically silenced by their radiant illness, the light they shone on corporate accountability remains a beacon. They turned a private nightmare into a public imperative, ensuring that the horrifying phrase, "lip, dip, paint," would forever be synonymous with the cost of unchecked industrial power and with the ultimate victory of justice.